My friends, to know oneself is often praised as the highest calling of philosophy and psychology. We are told, know yourself, and you will find freedom. Indeed, self-knowledge is essential. Without it, we remain blind, repeating patterns we cannot see, trapped by desires we do not understand. Yet Carl Jung warned us that there is another side to this pursuit. Self-knowledge, if taken to extremes, can become destructive. For there are depths in the human soul, shadows, contradictions, primal forces, that are not easily managed once brought into the light. To know yourself too deeply is to enter regions of the psyche that can overwhelm the conscious mind. It is to awaken forces that were meant to remain partly unconscious, to dissolve illusions that make life bearable, and to confront truths that may paralyze rather than liberate. Jung insisted that the unconscious is vast like an ocean and the conscious ego is but a small boat upon its waves. Dive too deep too quickly and you risk drowning. The task is balance. We must know ourselves enough to live authentically, to break free from blind repetition, to integrate our shadow. But we must also live, act, and relate to the world, not disappear into endless self-analysis. For the one who obsesses over every motive, every hidden archetype, every unconscious image, may lose the very spontaneity that makes life worth living. The unconscious, Jung believed, is not a small hidden corner of the mind, but a vast landscape that stretches far beyond what the ego can grasp. When people speak casually of a knowing themselves, they often imagine that the unconscious is simply a storehouse of forgotten memories or repressed desires. But Jung's insight was that the unconscious is not just a basement, it is an ocean. It holds not only the personal contents of our forgotten past, but also the collective heritage of humanity. Archetypes, primordial images, instincts, and mythological forces that shape us whether we recognize them or not. To venture too deeply into this realm without preparation is like setting sail into stormy waters with no compass, no anchor, and no experience in navigation. The danger is not that the unconscious is inherently evil, but that it is overwhelming. Consciousness, our everyday awareness, is a fragile construct. It is a thin light cast upon a much larger darkness. When that darkness suddenly floods into the conscious mind, the ego, the part of us that says I, can become destabilized. What once felt solid begins to dissolve. The person may no longer distinguish between inner images and external reality, between symbolic truths and literal facts. What was meant to be integrated slowly can instead erupt like a volcano, leaving destruction rather than growth. Jung saw this in his patients and in himself. He understood that dreams, fantasies, and visions often reveal truths about the psyche, but he also warned that if one dives headfirst into these depths without grounding, the line between healing and breakdown becomes dangerously thin. Too much contact with the unconscious can lead to psychic inflation, where one feels possessed by powerful archetypes, believing oneself to be a prophet, a savior, or a figure of immense importance. Other times, it can lead to fragmentation, where the self feels shattered under the weight of forces too large to comprehend. The unconscious is also morally ambiguous. It contains both creativity and destruction, love and cruelty, wisdom and madness. When a person exposes themselves too fully to it, without the ability to discern or contain what arises, they risk being swallowed by impulses they cannot control. It is like diving into deep water. The treasures are real, but so are the currents that can drag you under. To know yourself too deeply in this sense means awakening forces within that may be impossible to manage without strength, maturity, and guidance. For this reason, Jung often emphasized the need for balance. The unconscious must be respected, approached gradually, and integrated into consciousness step by step. Too little self-exploration leaves one blind, enslaved to hidden motives. Too much, too fast, and one risks losing the stability that makes life possible. The unconscious, then, is not an enemy but a powerful realm. It is a source of transformation, but also a reminder that not all knowledge can be safely absorbed at once. Knowing yourself too deeply, without the strength to carry that knowledge, can undo the very self you seek to understand. Excessive introspection often disguises itself as wisdom. On the surface, it seems noble to examine every thought, every emotion, every impulse, as though the path to freedom is paved entirely with analysis. But Carl Jung warned us that when this self-examination becomes compulsive, it ceases to liberate and instead begins to paralyze. The individual who constantly dissects themselves ends up trapped in an endless cycle of questioning. Why did I feel this? What does this dream mean? What archetype is influencing me here? While reflection is a tool of growth, overindulgence in it creates a life that is lived more in theory than in reality. The danger lies in the loss of spontaneity. Life requires action, decisions made without complete certainty, risks taken without full knowledge. But when someone has trained themselves to analyze endlessly, the ability to move forward weakens. Instead of saying yes to opportunities, they hesitate. Instead of loving fully, they calculate. No. Instead of engaging the moment, they retreat into their mind. The vitality of life is replaced with hesitation, and the person becomes more of an observer than a participant in their own existence. This paralysis is not without consequence. Jung understood that the psyche needs a balance between conscious control and unconscious flow. Too much control, too much thinking, creates stagnation. It is as though the individual is standing on the shore of a river, endlessly studying the water, analyzing the currents, measuring the depths, but never stepping in. The river, which represents the flow of life, passes them by while they remain fixed in their attempts to fully understand it before entering. But the truth is, no amount of observation will ever substitute for the act of immersion. Furthermore, excessive introspection can generate illusions of self-knowledge that are not truly lived. One may believe they have understood their shadow, their desires, their wounds, but unless these insights are acted upon in relationships, work, and everyday choices, they remain hollow. The danger is mistaking intellectual understanding for genuine transformation. A person can explain themselves brilliantly yet remain unchanged because they have not allowed life to test, refine, and ground their insights. This paralysis also breeds anxiety. When every decision must be perfect and every motive dissected, the weight of existence becomes unbearable. Jung often emphasized that the psyche seeks wholeness, not perfection, but the overly introspective person strives for an impossible clarity, wanting to purify themselves of contradiction, to explain away all mystery. This pursuit inevitably ends in frustration and despair because life will always retain an element of uncertainty. In trying to master the psyche completely, they become its prisoner. Jung would say the goal is not to abandon introspection, but to keep it in service of living. Self-reflection should guide action, not replace it. To live authentically requires moments of uncalculated spontaneity, leaps into the unknown, and the courage to act even when one does not fully understand. The one who constantly analyzes risks becoming like Hamlet, trapped in thought while life slips away. Excessive introspection, then, is not enlightenment but paralysis, a subtle way of hiding from life under the guise of knowing oneself. To confront the shadow is to face the darkest parts of yourself, the impulses, desires, fears, and traits that you would rather deny. Jung believed that wholeness requires integrating the shadow because what is repressed does not disappear. It only acts from the unconscious, influencing choices and relationships without your awareness. Yet he also warned that approaching the shadow is dangerous if done without preparation. To awaken what has been buried too quickly, or to believe one can handle it without inner strength, can lead not to growth but to collapse. The shadow is not simply a list of bad habits. It is the part of you that contains your aggression, envy, selfishness, lust, and cruelty, yes, but it also holds your untapped creativity, your vitality, and the instincts society has demanded you suppress. To confront it is to strip away the comforting illusion that you are only a good, a kind, or a rational. It is to discover that within you lies the potential for destruction as much as for love. Many people are not prepared for this revelation. When they meet their own darkness face to face, they recoil or deny it, which only gives it greater power. Others, instead of integrating, become fascinated with it, allowing the shadow to take control, justifying cruelty or indulgence as authenticity. Both extremes are perilous. Jung saw in his patients that those who encountered their shadow without preparation sometimes experienced psychological breakdowns. Old traumas could resurface with unbearable force, long repressed emotions could flood the conscious mind, and archetypal images could take on terrifying power. It is like opening a locked cellar that has been sealed for decades. You do not know what creatures or chaos might rush out. If the conscious ego is not strong enough to contain what emerges, it risks being swallowed. This is why Jung often insisted that shadow work must be done gradually with humility and often with the guidance of a skilled helper. Another danger of confronting the shadow unprepared is moral collapse. When someone realizes that their capacity for darkness is as real as their capacity for light, they may fall into despair, believing life has no meaning. Or worse, they may embrace the shadow without balance, letting destructive drives dominate their choices. 4. Jung warned that acknowledging the shadow is not an excuse to act it out. Integration means recognizing it as part of the whole self, not allowing it to dominate. Without this distinction, self-knowledge becomes self-destruction. At the same time, avoiding the shadow altogether is equally dangerous. What is ignored controls you more deeply than what is acknowledged. Jung's message was not to fear the shadow, but to respect it, to approach it with patience, courage, and a willingness to hold the tension between light and dark. The shadow must be neither denied nor unleashed, but integrated. Thus, the danger is clear. Confronting the shadow without preparation opens the door to chaos rather than healing. But when done carefully, with strength and awareness, it becomes the path to true transformation. To see your own darkness and still choose responsibility, compassion, and meaning, that is the essence of Jung's vision of individuation. To confront the shadow is to face the darkest parts of yourself, the impulses, desires, fears, and traits that you would rather deny. Jung believed that wholeness requires integrating the shadow because what is repressed does not disappear. It only acts from the unconscious, influencing choices and relationships without your awareness. Yet he also warned that approaching the shadow is dangerous if done without preparation. To awaken what has been buried too quickly, or to believe one can handle it without inner strength, can lead not to growth but to collapse. The shadow is not simply a list of bad habits. Jung observed that not everyone can withstand such revelations. For some, the removal of illusions leads not to liberation but to despair. They may feel life is meaningless, that their efforts are futile, or that they are merely puppets of unconscious forces. Too much truth, too quickly, overwhelms the fragile boundaries that allow us to function. What was meant to enlighten instead shatters the very vessel that carries consciousness. In extreme cases, this collapse manifests as depression, psychosis, or withdrawal from life. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of gradual integration. The ego must be strong enough to face deeper truths without collapsing under them. A strong ego is not one that clings to illusions stubbornly, but one that has the resilience to absorb revelations while maintaining balance. For example, to discover that your anger is not a flaw but also a source of vitality is a truth the ego can learn to carry. But to suddenly confront the full chaos of your unconscious without any grounding is more than most can bear. The paradox is that we need illusions, but we also need truth. The problem arises when one attempts to strip away every illusion, mistaking that process for ultimate wisdom. Jung's insight was that some illusions are not enemies. They are necessary veils that allow us to live, to love, and to act. Without them, life may appear too raw, too chaotic, too devoid of meaning. The challenge is not to destroy the ego, but to strengthen it so that it can hold more truth without collapsing. Therefore, the danger of knowing yourself too deeply lies in undermining the very structure that allows you to live as a self at all. To integrate deeper knowledge safely, one must respect the limits of consciousness, pacing the journey and preserving enough illusion to remain whole. It is not weakness to keep some veils intact, it is wisdom, for without a stable ego, even the greatest truths cannot be lived, they can only destroy. When self-knowledge turns into obsession, one of its most insidious dangers is isolation. To journey inward is necessary, but when the inward journey consumes you entirely, you risk losing connection to the outer world, the people, relationships, and shared experiences that give life meaning. Jung reminded us that the psyche does not exist in a vacuum. We are not solitary beings, we are shaped by culture, community, and love. To descend too deeply into yourself without balance is to drift away from these bonds until you find yourself alone, cut off, and misunderstood. The process begins subtly. The more time a person spends analyzing their thoughts and probing their unconscious, the more alien everyday conversations can feel. While others speak of work, friendships, or ordinary joys, the overly introspective person is preoccupied with inner symbols, archetypes, and hidden motives. So, this creates a gap between them and others, as if they are living in a different reality. The connection that sustains life, shared laughter, mutual struggle, collective purpose, begins to wither. The person convinces themselves that no one else could understand what they are going through, which deepens the isolation further. Jung often warned that too much focus on the inner world can make one forget the importance of relationship. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, was never meant to be a solitary achievement. It requires dialogue, confrontation, and intimacy with others. Through relationships, we see parts of ourselves reflected back. Through community, we learn humility. Without these mirrors, the inner journey risks turning into a spiral of self-absorption. The person becomes trapped in their private myths, unable to distinguish whether their insights are revelations or illusions. In extreme cases, this detachment can lead to delusion, where one loses touch with reality entirely. Another form of isolation arises from fear. When someone has uncovered painful truths about themselves, their shadow, their repressed wounds, they may begin to withdraw from others out of shame. They fear rejection if these hidden parts are revealed, so they retreat into silence. Yet isolation only strengthens the power of the unconscious, because what is not shared cannot be tested, challenged, or integrated. Jung believed that dialogue is essential for integration. Keeping everything within the self magnifies distortion. Isolation also robs the psyche of nourishment. Just as the body needs food, the soul needs relationship, love, friendship, even conflict. These are not distractions from the inner journey, but essential parts of it. To cut oneself off is to starve the soul of its most vital experiences. A person who becomes overly fixated on self-knowledge may end up like a monk without a monastery, withdrawn from life but without the grounding rituals and community that give solitude meaning. Thus, the danger is not in knowing yourself, but in knowing yourself at the expense of connection. Jung's vision was not to produce hermits lost in their own depths, but individuals who, having faced themselves, return to the world with greater compassion, understanding, and presence. True self-knowledge should make us more capable of love, not less. Not less. When it becomes an obsession that isolates us, it no longer heals, it destroys. The pursuit of absolute self-knowledge is one of the greatest traps for the human mind. Jung understood that the psyche is not a puzzle with a final solution, but a living, dynamic process. To believe you can fully and finally know yourself is to chase a mirage. The unconscious is not a fixed container of secrets waiting to be discovered. It is a flowing, shifting reality that reveals new aspects as life unfolds. Every stage of life brings new layers of meaning, new shadows, new desires, and new insights. Thus, the attempt to reach a complete understanding of the self is endless, and those who devote themselves to this pursuit without limit often find only exhaustion and despair. The danger lies in the illusion of completion. Many people imagine that if they could only peel back every hidden motive, analyze every dream, and decipher every symbol, they would finally achieve peace. But the more you look inward, the more you realize how much remains unseen. Like peeling an onion, every layer reveals another beneath it. Instead of clarity, one may end up overwhelmed by the endless complexity of the psyche. This does not lead to liberation, but to frustration, a feeling that one is never enough, never a done, never a whole. Jung cautioned against this obsessive drive for total self-knowledge because it removes you from the flow of life. Life is not lived in abstract insight, but in action, relationships, and choices. A person who endlessly examines themselves becomes caught in an inner labyrinth, mistaking analysis for progress. They exhaust their energy turning over the same questions, looking for final answers that do not exist. What begins as a noble journey of self-discovery becomes a self-imposed prison of reflection. This exhaustion is not only mental but spiritual. The constant search for perfect self-understanding can hollow out one's joy in living. Every experience becomes a subject for analysis rather than a moment to be felt. Instead of enjoying love, one dissects it. Instead of grieving, one studies it. The natural rhythm of life is interrupted by the compulsion to explain. Over time, this produces not wisdom but detachment, a weariness that comes from trying to measure the immeasurable. The truth, Jung insisted, is that the self cannot be fully grasped. The unconscious is infinite, and the archetypes that shape it are older and larger than any one individual. To demand complete knowledge of them is like demanding to hold the ocean in your hand. The wiser path is to accept mystery, to know enough to live more authentically, but not to exhaust yourself trying to achieve total comprehension. Wholeness is not the same as completion. It is not about reaching the end of self-knowledge, but about maintaining balance between the known and the unknown, the conscious and the unconscious. Thus, the pursuit of absolute self-knowledge becomes dangerous when it blinds us to this truth. It is not failure to leave parts of the self unexplained, it is humility. To accept that some aspects of our being will remain mysterious is not a weakness but a recognition of the vastness of existence. The danger is not in seeking to know yourself, but in refusing to stop seeking when the search itself has drained you of life. Balance, Jung believed, is the true key to wholeness. To know yourself deeply is necessary, but to lose yourself entirely in that quest is dangerous. The self is not something to be dissected endlessly or conquered like a battlefield. It is a living process that requires both awareness and participation in life. The greatest wisdom, then, lies not in knowing everything about yourself, but in learning how much to integrate and how much to leave in mystery. To find balance is to walk the fine line between depth and surface, between light and shadow, between introspection and action. Jung often compared the psyche to nature. Just as a tree grows both upward toward the light and downward into the soil, so too must we cultivate both consciousness and unconsciousness. If we ignore our roots, we wither. But if we become lost underground, chasing every root endlessly, we never grow toward the sky. Balance means recognizing that both forces are necessary. The unconscious must be respected and explored, but life must also be lived in the everyday world of relationships, work, and creative action. To overemphasize one at the expense of the other leads to distortion. This balance also applies to how we handle the shadow. To integrate the shadow does not mean to indulge every dark impulse, nor does it mean to deny it entirely. It means holding the tension, acknowledging that you are both capable of cruelty and compassion, of selfishness and sacrifice. To live authentically is to accept these contradictions without letting either side dominate. Without balance, the shadow either overwhelms you or hides in repression, both of which prevent true growth. Another dimension of balance is the relationship between truth and illusion. The ego cannot survive if stripped of all comforting narratives, yet it also cannot thrive if it clings to illusions blindly. Balance means allowing yourself enough truth to grow, while keeping enough structure to remain stable. It is not cowardice to hold on to certain illusions. It is a necessary adaptation. The danger of knowing yourself too deeply is that you might try to dissolve all illusions at once, leaving the ego naked. Balance teaches us to move carefully, peeling back layers gradually, letting the self adjust to each new revelation before going deeper. Balance also prevents isolation. Too much focus on the inner world cuts us off from others. Too much focus on the outer world blinds us to ourselves. The outer world blinds us to ourselves. A balanced life moves between solitude and community, between reflection and connection. Jung emphasized that individuation is not meant to produce a hermit lost in thought, but a person who can engage with the world more fully because they have faced themselves. True self-knowledge, when balanced, makes us better partners, friends, and creators. Ultimately, balance is about humility. It is the recognition that the self is larger than our conscious mind, that the unconscious will always retain some mystery. The goal is not to master it entirely, but to create a dialogue with it, to integrate what we can, to respect what remains hidden, and to live with the tension between the known and the unknown. In this way, we avoid drowning in the depths while still drawing from their wisdom. Jung's message is clear. Wholeness is not achieved by going to extremes, but by finding equilibrium. The self is not solved like a problem. It is lived as a process. And to know yourself enough to live authentically, yet not so much that you lose the joy of living, that is the balance that transforms knowledge into wisdom.